doesn't, oh, there it is. So here we are. It is January 4th, 2022. Thank you, Senator Collmore. And we are meeting remotely once again. I guess we're going to be remote for a little while. We don't know for how long. This is Senate Government Operations. And this week's schedule got a little bit chaotic because for a couple reasons. First of all, we didn't know what bills we were going to have, and we hadn't yet identified our priorities. And then Wednesday, we got a little bit screwed up because of the state of the state. And so what we're going to do, and Gail, are either, we are expecting the Secretary of State and Vermont League of Cities and Towns today, right?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay.
The Secretary at 3 and the VLCT at 3:30.
Yeah, but they should be here before to do the town meeting bill,
Yeah.
right?
I would invite them early, Senator.
Yeah, and they need to be here for the town meeting bill, because I thought that I was under the understanding that they would be here with us all day. So if you want to shoot them a note.
I will do that.
Yeah, because they should come to our committee meeting right away, because we're going to be doing that today. So what I thought we would do today is we were going to go through have IT train us on the rules of using the new equipment in our room. But since we're not there, Delia was scheduled to come and meet with us. But I think that, and we've been meeting like this for a whole year, so we kind of know what we're doing. But I guess there are a few things that we might want to go over, and if anybody has anything they want to go over today, just in terms of kind of housekeeping and rules and stuff. And I know that Senator Collmore plans on being in the State House. I plan on being in the State House next week, and probably at least every other week after that. I'm not sure if every week or not, because we also have rented a house up there, and we need to make sure that it doesn't freeze or plants dry up. So I will be up there. And if we were in the room meeting, we would, my preference is, and we've always done this, is not to use our computers or our iPads or our phones or anything, because it's distracting and we're supposed to be paying attention to what we're doing. So I am asking, and it's hard for us to regulate that because we can't see what each other are doing. And so I could sit here and be sending emails off and you wouldn't know it. But I'm asking us to honor that here as well, that we're here in the committee to do the work of the committee at the time. And we should be paying attention and doing that. So I don't know if anybody has any comments or anything about that, but yeah.
I have a thought about it, because I'm using an iPad now to look at us, obviously. But sometimes when we're looking at a bill or something, it's rather than watch it on the iPad, which eliminates you from the picture, I use my other iPad to read the bill that we're working on. So I'm not distracting us away from the committee. I'm actually using my other iPad to read a bill while keeping you folks on the screen to look at and talk to.
No, and I think that's fine as long as we keep it to that. But I do know that I know that we don't allow devices on the floor of the Senate, and I find that to be a good rule. And
yeah, I agree.
My concern is that often and we wouldn't know it here, but if you go into the house and watch people, often you see them doing their emails or paying bills or playing solitaire or whatever. And I think that as long as we're doing what Anthony suggested, that that's good. I mean, I think that's fine. Senator
Okay.
Collmore?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with you 100% and also with Senator Polina. I guess what I would ask, and I can only ask it, what I plan to do is take this and put it on mute for the entire Senate committee meeting session. I mean, that way, if I get an emergency message from my son or my wife, I can see it, but I'm not going to disturb the rest of you by having it bing or ring. So I've always done that, is just put it on mute and also not use the chat function.
Yes, I agree with that. And we didn't say that, but we should not be using the chat function because the time when the chat function is valuable is when somebody refers to a document or a website or something and Gail posts it on there. But otherwise, we shouldn't be using the chat because it's like a side conversation. So.
Yep.
Other thoughts about that or? Okay. So I don't know how, can we have just a little bit of a discussion about how we're going to do the, with the invites and having people come in with this for the, at least while we're remotely here, how we're going to do that? Do we send an invite to anybody who wants to come? That's my preference. Whether they're testifying or not.
Do you mean not having them in the wait room? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, if somebody says, if we were in the State House, if somebody saw something on the agenda and they wanted to sit in the room, they would just walk in and sit down. And I'm kind of thinking that we would do it the same way here. If they see something on the agenda and they say, wow, I'd really like to be there, we should send them an invite.
Well,
Sure.
yes, if they want to speak, but I think
No.
if people want to watch it, they're able on YouTube. If they want to contribute and testify, then I think that's something that you and Gail and Anthony should decide, make decision about.
I do agree with that, but I also think that there are times when people want to be in the room instead of just watching. And I'm thinking about, for example, oftentimes when we're dealing with something, there might be people in the room who haven't asked to testify or we haven't got them on the schedule. But if we have time, we often say, does anybody else have something to contribute? Well, if they're just watching on YouTube, they don't. And there are some people who have very specific interests in some of these bills. And that's just my thought. So the committee we need to figure that out.
Well, I tend to agree with you.
Senator Collmore?
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Here's my view on all of this, okay? I think we should proceed to the best of our ability to approximate the exact same conditions that would be in existence if we were in the building. And that includes having people sit on the couches against the wall here. That includes not being interrupted by having somebody's phone go off. We had a rule about, meal at Sarducci's and all that kind of thing, which I always got a big kick out of. We don't have a separate area in the room where 2 or 3 people can all of a sudden have a discussion like they might on a chat thing. So to the best of our ability, I think we should just approximate the exact same conditions that we would have if this were open to folks the way it normally would be. And I think that just makes sense.
Yeah, I think that was my thought, is that if we're looking at a municipal bill, we may have 4 people who are scheduled to testify, but there may be other select board members or people who have a real interest in it and might have something to add, but they haven't asked to testify, but I think they should be in the room with us. Does that make sense, Allison?
Yeah, I think they have to ask though. I mean, they have to express an interest in that subject and not,
Well,
yeah. I think you need, yes, however you'd like to handle it.
Yeah. I mean, it would be a little bit hard to just post the Zoom invite
Yeah,
for
I mean,
everybody.
you can't have 150 people on a Zoom meeting. I think that's unrealistic. But that's why we have it on YouTube, is that the public can access it
Yeah.
easily. And if they want to email us afterwards and ask to testify further, that's great. But I also think I appreciate the fact that this Zoom is in its manageable gallery size and not 88 people. So anyway, I think that people who have expertise and want to testify on a subject should be in the room with us. Absolutely. I think other than that, if people are interested in engaging with the issue, I'd love to have them watch and then be in touch if they want to testify further.
So, okay, Senator Ram Hinsdale.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only concern or suggestion I would raise is have a standardized procedure for this and have it posted on the committee website. You know, here's how you request to participate. We need your full name and affiliation. We ask that you not disturb in this way. If you do want to speak and it moves you in the meeting, raise your hand or something, and that we reserve the right to remove people if a disruption occurs. But I just think there has to be a standard way to treat people who come into the space so it doesn't feel like they enter in and they think some people have the opportunity to speak and others don't. It's just different when you're digital. Like, I know we're trying to create a space that's just like the committee room, but people kind of know how to interact in person. On Zoom, you know, it does change things to have control over how someone participates.
I think you're right, but I kind of disagree with a couple of the things. First of all, I think that we should have it on the website that if you want to be in the room, you have to notify us, and then we'll send you an invite. I don't care what their affiliation is. It can be Joe Schmo from East Podunk. That
But just, I think their full name at the very least, because that's how a lot of Zoom bombing happens is,
yeah.
You know, somebody just says, who knows who they are, you know, like, I think.
Oh, yeah. No, I think
I don't
you're
mean
right.
they have to have some fancy affiliation to come in, just that we know who they are or who they say they're representing.
Yep, I think that's good. And I do, I'm not sure how you meant this, but I don't want people raising their hand to talk. The only
Okay.
people that talk are committee members and the person that's testifying. When we can ask if anybody else has
Okay.
comments, but nobody else has the right to just, when we're in the State House, people can't just raise their hand and ask.
No,
to talk.
I agree. I would say,
Yeah.
having been in several different committees, you know, only 2 on Zoom, this and economic development, there does get to be times in here where it's informal and people who others may or may not know have an official role with the Secretary of State's office or somewhere start to chime in or raise their hand. And I just wouldn't want everyone to feel like they have the equal right to do that if they're not. I think what you do is usually list people on the agenda. So it might just help to say, even if it's informally at the beginning of the committee, these are the people that we've recognized to be part of this discussion. Otherwise, I think people will just take a cue to weigh in, and I just don't want them to feel embarrassed if they don't realize they're not supposed to talk.
Yeah,
That's all.
yeah, it's good to have the rules so people understand. Senator Plena?
I agree with all that. What I'm wondering is whether or not, it would be kind of up to you, Jeanette, to remember this, but to make it clear that the people who are going to speak are the people who are invited witnesses. But when we're all done, there might be an opportunity for others to like make comments, but not in between witnesses and all. That would be like the end of the meeting. It's like having a public comment period at the end of a meeting. I don't know, something like that might be good. It's a sort of a compromise.
And sometimes it's just at the end of a bill when you're dealing with a particular issue and you just want, does anybody else have anything to weigh in?
Right.
And I think that we've done that pretty successfully in the committee room.
Definitely.
And I don't see why we can't do it here just as successfully. So, all right. So we have to, we need to set our priorities. And so what I thought we would do is just kind of, I'm going to make a plea at the chairs meeting this afternoon to have to have people get their bills in. Apparently, we have until the 14th to get co-sponsors. If we don't, that means we won't get bills until the 17th or 18th or 19th. That's way too late. We have, so I think that people should just submit their bills without co-sponsors, because if we don't get bills until the 18th or 19th, that's pushing it in terms of getting our priorities set and making sure that we're dealing with what we need to deal with. So I'm going to bring that up at the chairs meeting. I don't know that anybody will agree with me, but it came up in judiciary this morning because I know there are a couple bills that are floating around out there waiting for co-sponsors to come to judiciary. And they're going to be heavy lifts. I know Senator McCormick has a threatening speech for public officials. And if we don't get that, I mean, something like that, we have to be able to start early. So I'm going to encourage people. So if I would encourage any of you, if you have bills out there, just get them in, because as you saw this morning, when the bills were listed on the website, it only gave the main sponsor anyway. It didn't list all the co-sponsors. So co-sponsors are nice, but sometimes pretty meaningless. So anyway, so who wants
Well,
to
also
start?
sometimes in terms of priorities, it seemed this morning that we got a lot of bills sent to this committee. So it's
We did.
hard to wait. We have to wade through those to see what they are.
I'm
Well,
looking at them now. We got quite a few, and we have all those charters too that we, yeah.
we have still in our committee 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 bills from last year.
Yeah.
And then we have 3 that were stuck in rules. One of them is Burlington. I don't remember the other 2. And then we got a whole bunch this morning.
We got 12 this morning.
But so aside from the bills that we got, what are people's priorities for us? I can tell you that the one thing that we may not want to deal with, but we have to, is pensions. So that's a huge priority for us.
And of course, we'll get the apportionment recommendations from the committee. That will be big. And
No, I don't think they'll come to this committee. I think they'll go directly to the floor.
oh, I thought it came to our committee first.
I don't think so. But I'll check and make sure, but I don't think so.
Oh, I assumed it did.
Yeah, Keisha?
Well, I'll just name 2 that, may or may not
Yeah.
be on other people's list. I introduced last year S96 and S147. S96 is a state planning office. And I continue to get emails from folks asking if this will get any airtime, because they just see it as a more and more of a priority as we look to spend, billions of dollars now, and are not currently, don't have a very good system of tracking that for who our vendors are, how diverse they are, not to mention other issues around who regional planning commissions end up reporting to and how their work is standardized. And it's a study, and I think it's just a really important one as we keep looking at, how government accountability issues and the things we've talked about with data across state government. S147 does have a bit of a sense of urgency from the communities impacted and those they work with. It's a language access plan for the state. And it's the idea that we, don't have a particularly prioritized, standardized plan for how to roll out comprehensive language access for those who don't speak English. And it was recently raised to me, people have similar concerns from the deaf and hard of hearing community, the community of, possibly, I hadn't heard from the Association for the Blind, but definitely the deaf and hard of hearing community and those who rely on ASL have reached out as well. But, as we're looking more at digital government and how we communicate in emergencies, this has become more and more of an issue for folks. And I do have people who've asked if they could testify to the sort of gaps in the experience on that front. So those are just two bills already on our wall that I think are gaining importance.
Yep, I think. And so what I was hoping we would do is kind of define, like Senator Rahm Hinsdale just did, what the bills are that are important to us. And then I haven't scheduled, we will hear either Thursday or Friday, like on a pension 101, because I think that we need to have some basic understanding from Chris Roop and Beth Pierce about the pension system and where we are and why we're here and what needs to be done, even before we have the bill itself. So that's kind of an introductory 101. But other than that, on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, I was hoping that what we could do is then begin to walk through some of the bills that we've defined as priorities. That so that and that isn't to say that that's the only time we'll get to do it, but if we define those as priorities now, we can start to walk through them so that we can get busy here. So thank you. Senator Polina, Senator Collmore.
I yield to the senator from Washington County if he wants.
Well, he didn't have his hand up. You did.
Oh.
I just know that
I
he
was
has a
thinking about it,
priority.
though.
Okay. Is there a way, Madam Chair, to get a list of the bills that were, I want to put this left over, but the bills that we ran out of time considering last time? I'd also like at some point, obviously, to take a look at the 12 new ones, but I have no idea about any of those really.
They're on our website, Brian,
under
bills in committee.
Okay.
And the ones that begin S155, I think anything above 150 is new. Anything that's a House bill or that's below 150 is old.
So
Helpful. That's
Senators,
great.
they're
So-
also on the billboard behind Senator Collmore.
Oh,
So maybe just to run through the ones that very quickly that are left over from last year was the contractual rights for state employees, S43, the ranked choice voting. And I can tell you, my position on that is that we're not going to do that this year. It's an elections issue. And I know that VPIRG is really pushing it, but we can't make major changes in elections during an elections year. So my intent is not to do that unless the whole committee rolls me. Parole officers and probation officers carrying guns, sheriff's deputies as state employees, the GAC bill, the planning office, which Senator Rahm Hinsdale has already talked about. I can't even read, it's Senator Sirotkin bill about live streaming from the legislature. I think maybe we don't need to do that or we can look at it if anybody wants. Presidential electors, silver alert, membership of the Vermont employees, municipal employees, and the language access bill that Senator Rahm Hinsdale. Those are the ones that are left over from last year. And I don't, if somebody has a priority of one of those, if you introduced it or if you are wedded to it.
I would.
Yes, Senator Collmore.
again, I would yield to the senator from Washington County who spoke first.
Just quickly, I would want to I'll take a closer look at some of those bills between now and the next day or so to see
Okay.
whether they are priorities. A lot of them don't sound like my priorities, but you never know until you read them.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say is that I agree with what Senator Collmore said before about the different bills. And I think that there's one bill that is not on our wall, but because we sent it to the House, I think last year, not sent to the House, but got it introduced in the House. But we want to make some progress on implementing a code of ethics for state government. So that's a bill that's not introduced yet, I don't think. It may have been introduced today. It may have come to our
It got
committee today,
was.
actually.
today.
It's 171.
It's
Okay.
yeah, it's but
So I just would like to, we've been playing around with that for like 3 or 4 years now, it seems. And just so you know, it's not an enforcement bill. It's not going to create much enforcement. It's going to create a blanket sort of standard that all of state government would use to determine ethics violations or ethics codes.
I was going to list it as one of my priorities, Anthony.
There you go. Then I'll cede to you.
Senator Robinson.
Oh, now I feel like I jumped over the senator from Rutland County. As I raised my hand.
Boy, are we being overly polite, which is great. It's who we are. Gosh
We're gonna
darn
start
it.
that way.
Gosh darn it.
Yeah, we could start that way.
I realize the parole officers with guns is probably, I got a better shot at winning the lottery. So I'm going to just back off that and not really, because I did introduce it, but that's okay. I still thought it was a good bill, but anyway, GAC, we have to pass, I believe. So that's one of mine. And I'm going to join Anthony and Allison on S-171 and the ethics. I really do feel strongly that we've been talking about it long enough. I think this committee supports it, and it's time to get it across the finish line. So those are the 3 that I had on the list that you read, Madam Chair.
So Allison, did you have some more priorities?
Keisha went first. She raised her hand. I, of course, just jumped in. So I'll go after Keisha.
Thank you. Now we've all supported each other in this way. We're off to a great start. I did just want to say, and I don't want to sort of back you into a corner, Madam Chair, if this is something you have strong feelings about. I was very intrigued by Senator Polina's legislation last year, maybe he's introduced it before, around codifying retirement and pension contracts once someone is hired, so that if we do this pension reform again this year, we then kind of make it a more assured agreement beyond someone's hire date, that we really truly communicate to people that this is the last time that we will mess with people's retirement after they've been employed.
Well, I think that, first of all, I think that if we ever found ourselves in the situation where we are right now, we would have to mess with them, because it is a contract unless there's real overwhelming need to make changes. And right now, if we didn't make any changes, our whole pension and healthcare benefits program for retirees would implode. We would not have any. So even if it is considered a contract, it has to change we can take that up when we look at pensions, and we can look at that one again. That's S43.
I will remind us all that tenure was a contract. Tenure is considered a contract, and yet the out clause on tenure is when if an institution is financially unstable enough so that it can be broken. And remember, everyone at Vermont Law School was fired except for 4 people, all those tenured faculty who thought they were set just like everybody else. Yeah. So it's not
a guarantee.
It's no guarantee. Madam Chair.
Yes.
Kate, are you done? May I jump in?
Yes. Can I make one more point? I think, Madam Chair, I heard you talk about the election issue related to ranked choice voting. I just want to make sure it's clear to our audience and whoever in the committee, that bill is about 2024. It's about the presidential election. They're not the bill that's on our wall, but there's a new version coming that would just focus on the presidential election. I think the reasoning being that if we don't do it in a year like this one, then we'd be looking at the lead up to that presidential election, debating it, which might be a bit of a time crunch. So there's a new bill version coming that's looking solely at 2024 and beyond, just so folks know what's on the
Okay, I didn't know that. Thank you. So Senator Clarkson?
So the only other thing I would add, and it hasn't yet been introduced, but it's all in the process, is a bill that I have giving those who work in the temp pool who become full-time state employees, the ability for them to get credit for their retirement for that temp time. And that bill is coming down hopefully will be introduced in the next day or so.
Okay,
And obviously then I also am a big supporter of the code of ethics and our work on all the other work that we're already going to be doing. And I would like to continue our work hand in glove with I'd like to continue our work improving the training of our public safety community, our work with the Criminal Justice Training Council. I'd like to continue our work on really making Vermont have the finest, best trained police and public safety people in the country. And I'd really love to continue our work with that. And it may complement work that the judiciary is doing, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't continue that work. Now that we have a new executive director there, and we have so many new aspects of that work to build on the work we've already done. I would really like to make sure we do that.
well, to that point, I am going to once again pursue the Agency of Public Safety, because I really think that we need to go in that direction, and that is a priority of mine. I also, I have a bunch of them. The top priorities are, I have that one. We have a 181, which is a municipal bill. It gives municipalities, as you know, the way we do this is unless we specifically say that a town can do something, they can't. As opposed to most states in the country, they say what towns can't do. And if they don't say they can't, then they can. So what this does is looks at general law and has a number of places where we're going to just say towns have the ability to do this. If you remember Woodstock, it took us about 1.5 years to allow them to use their parking meter money for anything other than more parking meters. I mean, that is ridiculous for us to spend our time on things like that. So this is, it's 181, and that's a huge priority of mine. And then there are some other ones that I'm really interested in. I'm interested in, again, of the election or appointment of the adjutant general. And I'm going to have to figure out if it's worth spending time on it, because there are some immovable forces in the House that don't want it. And we have an optometry bill that is around their scope of practice. And I once again want us to look at S107, which is now S175, which is the prohibition against publishing the names of youth who are on their initial arrest.
Right.
And the governor vetoed it, but he vetoed it not because of that, but because of issues that he had with the Raise the Age initiative, and judiciary is making changes to the Raise the Age. So this would complement that. So There are some other things in here that I think other people would like to have us look at. The State House Overview Committee, I haven't read that, but
Yeah, we'd love to, yes, Anthony and I would love to make sure that we work on that, Bill and Ruth. I mean, this was a result of our work this summer and fall. So we're very pleased with this.
yep. So I think that what we'll do is I will try to schedule somebody to walk us through S96, S147. Those are that's the planning office and the language access. The Agency of Public Safety, the ethics bill, the municipal bill, and then we'll schedule more after that. We also have a request around the open meeting law to allow, once again, to allow people to have them remotely without having somebody at a physical presence, because it's causing a lot of trouble. Towns and planning commissions and everybody have to have two people for safety purposes. So they're be at a physical location because they feel very uncomfortable about having one person alone at a physical location to have the public come in. So that's a bill that isn't here yet, but will be here. So I think that, yes, Senator
Madam
Clarkson.
Chair, may I just, I'm glad you mentioned the open meeting bill, because it ties into the work we're about to do on town meeting in a way. It's a, sort of the next piece to it. The other thing I would just, we've put so much effort and time into our regionalization of public safety. And I would hope that we could maybe make another step forward in that work. And I don't know what it is, but I feel like we need to consider that and build on again, just like our improving our police training and the work we're doing on that. I think it would be great if we could continue our work on piloting regionalization or encouraging further regionalization of public safety.
Yeah, there are a whole bunch of issues under public safety that I'm concerned about. One is fire, EMS, law enforcement, how we do that, dispatch. And I think that we'll hear from around some issues around dispatch and what's happening there, because I think that the administration, Commissioner Sherling has some ideas around dispatch, and I've been working with him over the summer and with some other people. So that kind of whole ball of things is an issue that, or an area that we'll address. Thank you. So we do have a bill that we have to pass right away. And is Tucker joining us, Gail?
Tucker will be joining us. He's not here just yet.
Okay, so I'm going to, before we jump into this bill, then I'm going to bring up something that I find very, very, very distressing that happened last year. For some reason, some town attorneys read this thinking that they could use this to permanently change to Australian ballot and eliminate town meeting. I don't understand how that got misinterpreted. That was never the intent that was never our intent. And a number of towns have done it. And I think that we need to figure out how we're going to deal with that. And I don't know if anybody else has heard from those towns, but Heinsberg did it, Rockingham did it, Athens was going to do it, and then they didn't. I don't know if, Krista, other towns that have done that? You are muted.
Trying desperately to find my mute button here. No, Madam Chair, we actually hadn't heard that. I'm not aware of any. I don't know if Secretary Kondo says some folks in our elections division might have heard that, but I understand it's been an issue.
I just had a conversation this morning with somebody in Rockingham, and they they did it, and Heinsberg did it because I had a conversation with a reporter up there who was very concerned about it. So I don't know how we're going to handle those. And apparently the Secretary of State's office is saying that it was open to interpretation and the courts will have to settle it. And I don't understand that.
You may want to talk to Will Senning about that. I'm not sure what we would have said on the subject. They would have talked to Will, I'm sure.
Okay. All right. So, but given that,
Can I ask a clarifying question?
yeah,
It's
I
pretty
mean, yes.
basic. It's pretty basic. So you're saying they use the bill we passed as an excuse or whatever, as an avenue to eliminate town meeting. What would the town have to do if they did want to eliminate town meeting and go just to Australian ballot? I mean, what would
the
that
way they have
process
to do it is they have to, if you have floor meetings and you make your decisions on the floor, then it has to be on a warning for a floor meeting that you're going to the
Right.
next year, do it all by Australian ballot. You can't
Right.
decide by Australian ballot to go to Australian ballot. And that's what at least 2 towns have done.
Yeah, that's what I figured. You'd have to make it, warn it and have a community discussion about it and whatnot, and
Right,
then take a vote on it. Yeah. Okay.
right.
And Madam Chair, just as you discuss this issue, I wouldn't use the word eliminate town meeting. Australian ballot does not eliminate town meeting. We have a town meeting and we have Australian ballot. So I want to make sure we don't talk about something eliminating town meeting. It just, it changes the nature of it, but it doesn't eliminate town meeting.
Well, that, in my mind, it does eliminate
I
town
know-
meeting. It eliminates
Yeah,
it eliminates the floor town meeting.
it only eliminates the votes. It doesn't
No.
even eliminate those. You can still have votes on the floor for
No, you
different.
couldn't. If you went to everything by Australian ballot, there is no floor vote.
Things could be introduced that you could vote on in a town meeting.
No, not if
No,
you go by
not
Australian
anything.
ballot. If you have an Australian, if you do go to Australian ballot, that's what you do. You have on your
Right, but
Australian
it
ballot
doesn't-
is,
I know, but I just want to make sure for people watching, this does not mean we eliminate town meeting because most towns that have Australian ballots also have very robust town meetings.
well, they might have Australian ballot. We have Australian ballot for the election of our officers. Everything else is done on the floor. That's different than doing everything by Australian ballot. If you're doing everything by Australian ballot, you cannot make any changes on the floor. You
Right.
cannot.
Well, but we still have robust town meetings despite the fact that we don't vote, that we vote Australian ballot. So I just want to
You
make
vote
sure
everything by
people
Australian
don't-
ballot,
Yeah, Woodstock has a great town meeting. And
but
we
you
do-
vote everything by Australian ballot,
Yes,
everything?
yes, everything.
Okay,
I
but they
mean,
can't make any
there's lots
changes,
to
right?
talk about. There's still
Huh?
lots to discuss.
Senator, Secretary, or let's go to Senator Colmore. I think he has a question, and then Secretary Condos.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Senator Clarkson then. How does anything get changed once the ballot's been printed? You may have a very robust floor discussion, but that won't change anything that's already on the ballot that you're just going to vote for.
Right.
Oh,
How does
Right,
that?
but
I
the
don't
reason we
understand.
come, right, but the reason you come to town meeting is to hear the explanation of the budget from the town. We discuss all sorts of and there are new things that are brought up. There's lots to discuss. I mean, just because, voting and meeting are different pieces of it.
Well-
I'm gonna throw something on, then I'm gonna go to Secretary Condos. According to Frank Bryan, if you really want to have a meaningful town meeting, you have to have a couple things. You have to have a real issue, you have to have real discussion, you have to have a real vote on the issue, and then you have to carry it out. If you do everything by Australian ballot, you cannot change anything. You can have all the discussion in the world that you want, but you cannot make any changes on that ballot. When we go to our town meeting, if the select board has cut the fire department, people go in and say, wait a minute, we don't want to cut the fire department. We're going to amend their budget. You can't do that on an Australian ballot. You
Right.
can't, if the question is, should we give the gun club tax exempt status for 5 years? The question is that. You can't say, let's do it for 3 years because it's on the ballot. So
Right.
you can have all the discussion you want, but you can't change a thing and you can't add a thing.
But you can illuminate things, and that is very helpful. So we have all those petitions for all the nonprofits that each town is asked to contribute to. We have a full discussion about those. We have a full discussion of our budget, and our town meeting is Saturday and our voting is Tuesday. And it affects that information and that work affects how people vote.
Your town meeting, your information session is Saturday. Your
We
town
call
meeting
it
is,
town meeting. It's a town meeting. I'm sorry, Jeanette. I know you feel
Okay.
differently about this, but
Okay.
for us, it's a town meeting.
okay. Well, Secretary Condos, did you want to weigh in?
Well, I just want to say that I actually agree with Senator White on this. What you're describing, Senator Clarkson, is an informational meeting, and the Australian ballot has to be set because it has to be available 20 days before the actual vote day, the election day, so that's town meeting day is the day you actually vote. Informational sessions can occur the night before, the day before, the weekend before. That's an informational session. Maybe Woodstock calls it a town meeting, but it's really not. It's an informational session. And once you have a ballot that has been printed, that is your discussion. Now, if you have a informational meeting where you're actually discussing the items on the ballot, that's another point, but that's an informational meeting. It is not a town technical.
We just lost you, Secretary Condos. Senator Polina?
I agree with Jeanette as well on this, but it's another way of looking at it. I agree that we can't change what's on the ballot, but you could perhaps, I pose this as a question, couldn't you perhaps raise issues that are not on the ballot and take them up at the floor of town meeting? We have our budget and our elections and whatnot on the Australian ballot, but what if somebody came in and said, well, I want to propose that we put bicycle racks up around town.
Yeah.
So it doesn't affect what's on the ballot. It's a new question. You can't do that either.
If you do everything by Australian ballot, then nothing can be added to that. That's the warning. Those are the articles of warning. And anything that isn't on the articles of warning, you can discuss and you can talk about and you can suggest to the select board that they put up bicycle racks. But if it's not on the warning, it isn't a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's
It's rogue.
It's what?
Couldn't it be under new business and you could vote on something under new business?
You wouldn't have a new business if you had Australian ballot.
No, but we have a meeting. I mean, it's a gathering of the community. Anyway, seems to be a semantical discussion, but to go to Anthony's point, if you have a new item under new business and there's no reason, I don't think you couldn't vote on it.
But if you do everything on Australian ballot, there is no new business because you do everything on the Australian ballot and you can only suggest to the select board. Putney, we always have things on ours, like, should we be a nuclear free zone or should we prohibit putting children, immigrant children in cages? We always have things like that. We can talk about that all we want and we can vote on it, but it's doesn't hold any water. It's a sentiment of the town only. It's not binding. So anyway, that was a good discussion, but I think I'm going to have to check out this Woodstock and see what they think they're doing over there.
We are meeting. I mean, it may be, as Jim says, a semantical difference, but it's about the same number of people that came before went to Australian ballot. So it's this, town meeting is town meeting. We feel like we hold our town meeting on Saturday. So does Reading's. I mean, lots of towns do. But you're right, Jim, it may be technically an informational meeting, but no one views it as that. They view it as town meeting.
So what if they wanted to reinstate the fire department that the select board eliminated? They couldn't do that.
But you're right, but it gives us an opportunity for explanation, anyway.
Anyway, okay. All right, so let's go to the bill that we have to do. Yes,
Yeah.
Secretary Condos, you're back.
Yeah, and just as a point of reference, that's the second time I've been cut off. I'm not sure what's going on, but this goes to the issue of remote access. I'm not even touching my computer, and I've been cut off twice. So I just want to let the committee know that. But I think the issue here is you're right, Senator Clarkson. It is a matter of semantics, but technically that's not town meeting. Now, you may call it town meeting, but that's not town meeting. Town meeting is the annual meeting is the actual voting that takes place. Now, if you look at across the state, there are many different ways. Some towns do everything from the floor, and some towns do everything by Australian ballot. And then there's all kinds of options in the middle. I mean, so some towns might vote all their candidates by Australian ballot, but do the budget on the floor. Some might do the budget by Australian ballot and candidates on the floor. So there are so many different ways, and this is why it's so difficult to try to come up with single decision-making that impacts all of town meeting. And I'll give you the best example that I can right now is when some folks last year were pushing to extend vote by mail down to town meeting level. We kept saying there are so many different ways for that to occur that it makes it difficult to come up with something on the fly, on the floor, to try to pass that would work in all situations. So that's why, you have to be careful, but at the same time, and I'm sure that Gwen can agree with me on this, that it's really, there's a lot of good that comes out of the town meeting, no question about it. And I think that's why the amendment that Senator White was proposing was to clarify and make sure that people understand that they can't use the temporary procedure to try to impact future permanency.
So with that, let's go to Tucker. And I don't know if the bills that were introduced today, if the text is on the website yet. This morning I went there and tried to find some for judiciary, and the texts weren't there yet. So what I'm going to suggest maybe is that Tucker walk us through this bill and amendment. This is, let's see, it does have a number now. It's 172. And this would allow, this is another temporary measure to allow town meetings to use Australian ballot again this year, but it's only, Gail just said the text link is available now. So we can, which do you want to do, committee? Do you want Tucker to put it up on the screen, or do you want to go to your other devices and look at it yourself?
Let's look at it on our own devices.
Okay.
And then we can see each other's faces.
Where will we find it?
Using-
On our website?
Yeah, it's listed under 172. It's
Okay.
So we
I
should,
just posted the link in chat.
we should use our own devices. Okay, so let's do that then and have Tucker walk us through the bill and the amendment. The amendment really is, as the secretary said, clarification. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Tucker Anderson from the Office of Legislative Counsel, wonderful to see you all again, and so soon, day one, here we are. I'll walk you through S-172, which is Senator White's bill to provide temporary authority for alternative procedures for the 2022 annual meetings. The authority that is provided within the four corners of this bill is all carried over from two other bills, Act 162 from 2020, and some portions from Act 92 from the same session, and those were temporary COVID response authority granted by the General Assembly. I'll start with Section 1, which declares legislative findings, intent, and purpose. Under these findings, it is stated that the General Assembly finds that the continued spread of COVID-19 in Vermont has potential to jeopardize the health, safety, and welfare of Vermonters that are voting in the 2022 annual meetings. Those meetings include, of course, not only the annual municipal meetings, but also the school district meetings that are required by law. Subdivision 2, it states that in 2021, the General Assembly enacted Act 60 to authorize the use of outdoor polling places and the mailing of ballots to all active registered voters in municipalities that use the Australian ballot system for local elections. However, concerns persist for the 2022 annual municipal meetings because, and here we come across the first error, I believe, of the 2022 session, because it states in subdivision A that in municipalities applying the Australian ballot system to those meetings, general law requires voters to apply for an early voter absentee ballot. And Chris is here and he can probably correct this because he worked with Ameren along with Will Senning, but I believe that's incorrect, and that municipalities now under 17 VSA section 2680 subsection F are permitted to just mail out ballots to all of their active registered voters, provided they've already adopted the Australian ballot system. So maybe that's something that should be quickly cleaned up in the bill as it moves forward. But subdivision B is still correct. Many municipalities want to continue their custom of conducting annual meetings using floor votes. Those are the voice votes that many Vermonters are familiar with. Subsection B states the intent and purpose of the bill. The intent of the General Assembly here is that the citizens of Vermont should be able to protect their health, safety, and welfare while also continuing to exercise their right to participate in annual municipal meetings. Accordingly, the purpose of this act is to permit municipalities to, by vote of the legislative body, apply the Australian ballot system to the municipality's 2022 annual meeting exclusively, and two, to move the date of the municipality's 2022 annual meeting to a potentially safer date later in the year. These are two pieces of authority that had been previously granted for the 2021 annual meetings. Section 2 contains all of the operative temporary authority that is granted by this act. Starting in subsection A that deals with the Australian ballot authority. It's on line 5, page 3. Notwithstanding the provisions of 17 VSA section 2680 subsection A, and I'll flag that because this is very specifically setting aside that subsection, and 16 VSA section 711E that applies to school districts, that requires the voters of a municipality to vote to apply the provisions of the Australian ballot system to the annual or special meeting of the municipality. In the year 2022, any municipality may apply the Australian ballot system to its annual meeting held in the year 2022 by vote of its legislative body. Any such vote shall also apply the Australian ballot method of voting to any vote that occurs as a result of the annual meeting. So there's a nexus there, such as a budget revote or a reconsideration vote. So again, this is applying Australian ballot to the annual meetings of those municipalities. And then if there's a link between that annual meeting and a later vote, then the authority for the Australian ballot continues on and would be applied to those subsequent revotes or votes for reconsideration. Subsection B, starting with subdivision B1, a municipality may use electronic means without designating a physical location to conduct public informational hearings that are held pursuant to 17 VSA 2680H in advance of the municipality's annual meeting. To bring us all onto the same page, these are informational meetings that are held where the voters get together, discuss issues related to the annual meeting, and that in this particular instance are most often overseen by the moderator that is elected at the local level. This subsection is going to set aside some authority for municipalities to conduct these informational hearings using an electronic means with a few specific requirements. So moving on to subsection B2 and some of those requirements. When a public informational hearing is held electronically under subdivision 1, the municipality shall use technology that permits the attendance of the public through electronic or other means, allow the public to access the hearing by telephone whenever that is feasible, and finally, to post information on how the public may access meetings electronically and include that information in the published agenda for the hearing. Final requirement. Unless unusual circumstances make it impossible for them to do so, the legislative body of each municipality and each school board shall record any public informational hearing held pursuant to this subsection. As you may recall, the same requirements that we just walked through in each of the subdivisions A through C, and then that subdivision 3, were the same requirements that were applied to municipalities under the temporary authority as it was applied to the open meeting law, and some of those suspended requirements to hold totally electronic meetings. So this is taking those same requirements and applying it here to the informational hearings and says, hey, municipalities, if you decide to hold your informational hearing via electronic means, you're going to conduct it in this manner with this sort of notice to the voters. And you're going to record your meetings in the same manner that you were recording your meetings under the open meeting law in 2020. Subsection C, notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, in the year 2022, a municipal legislative body may vote to move the date of the municipality's 2022 annual meeting to a date later in the year 2022. And in subdivision 2, the town of Brattleboro may hold its annual representative town meeting by electronic means. These were two pieces of authority that had previously been granted for the 2021 annual meetings. In any municipality that moves the date of its 2022 annual meeting pursuant to subdivision C1 of this section, municipal officers shall serve until the meeting and until successors are chosen. In subsection E, there is some temporary authority pulling all of this together. The Secretary of State may waive statutory deadlines or other statutory provisions or provisions set forth in a school district's articles of agreement related to a municipal election as necessary in order for a municipality to apply the Australian ballot system to its meeting in accordance with subsection A of this section. That authority applies to statutory provisions set forth in a municipal charter or provisions set forth in a school district's articles of agreement if the waiver is requested by the municipality. The act is set to take effect on passage, and I suspect that if this does move forward, that might be fairly soon. Would you like me to move on to the amendment and discuss it all together here? All right, I will.
Yes, please.
The committee is proposing an amendment to the bill that would add a subsection F that would state expressly that the provisions of 17 VSA section 2680 subsection E shall apply to any municipality that votes to hold the 2022 annual municipal meeting by Australian ballot. To pause there, this is a subsection that states that when a municipality is voting to hold its future meetings and potentially all future meetings by Australian ballot, they cannot hold that vote by Australian ballot. So if there is floor vote municipality out there that wants to move to Australian ballot, they must hold that vote on the floor with everyone voice voting as their custom currently is. They can't use an Australian ballot vote to change to Australian ballot. That stays the same. Now, to be clear, the bill, as it is written, does not set aside this requirement. So really what this amendment is doing is it's stating very clearly that the general law still applies, that we are not setting it aside, we're not suspending it, and that if you want to change to Australian ballot beyond 2022, you're going to have to do it at a floor vote according to current custom for your municipality. And we double down with the second statement here, the end of subsection F. A municipality shall not warn any question on whether the municipality shall adopt the Australian ballot method of voting on a permanent basis for any or all articles for any subsequent municipal elections. Maybe a bit belt and suspenders or overkill, but we have two statements here that 2680E still applies and that you can't use the temporary authority to change to Australian ballot on a permanent basis.
Thank you. Are there any questions? And I know that the amendment and those two statements make it sound like we're talking to third graders, but there was really misunderstanding among some towns and even their town attorneys last year about doing that. They thought they could use the Australian ballot to move to Australian ballot, and a couple towns have done it. So Senator Collmore, did you have a?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I'm in full support of the amendment. I don't mind being overly clear. I think that actually serves us well, at least in this regard. I have a question for Tucker, though. Assuming that all of what you just read at the time referenced the 2021 annual meetings, I fail to see how anybody could have had any misunderstanding about what this committee's intent was. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, Tucker, but I'm not a lawyer, so I have no, I mean, if I read that it only counts for the 2021 town meeting, how could I not understand that I couldn't make it permanent?
There were actually two pieces there that were fairly express that 2680E was still going to apply. The first was that all of the authority under the previous act was exclusively for 2021. And the second was that we only not withstood one subsection of 2680, and that was subsection A. Subsection E, which had that restriction, was still in place. And beyond that, I won't comment on what interpretations of this committee's intent or the previous act were out there.
Understood and appreciate your response. So yeah, I'm in full support of the bill, the underlying bill, and also the amendment. And as I said, I believe we need to be super clear about what we intend.
And yeah, Senator Plana. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I support the amendment and the bill. I have a question though about, I thought in the past, this one says you don't have to have a designated location for informational meetings, correct? Whereas before we did need a designated place. I just want to be clear that that's a change we're making in this way we're doing this. I'm not saying I'm for or against it. I just want to be clear that it's a change.
So without getting too in the weeds and too
Sure.
confusing about this, that subsection is making sure that folks who interpret the open meeting law to apply to these informational hearings understand that they don't have to follow, under this authority, the general law under the open meeting law that requires a designated physical meeting location where staff are required to attend.
Okay.
Now, it gets really confusing and potentially is a contentious debate about whether the open meeting law can even be applied to a meeting where the moderator is the officer that's overseeing the discussion being held by the voters. Is there a public body involved? Does the open meeting law apply? I certainly don't want to be the one to make that interpretation for all of my legal colleagues out there in Vermont. But here we're saying in general terms, you can hold this meeting electronically and you do not have to designate a physical meeting location.
Thanks.
Any more questions or clarification for Tucker? I think I know that, and I agree with you, Senator Colmer. I don't know how it could have been misinterpreted, but clearly it was, even by some town attorneys. And so that's why we're trying to make it very clear. And the other thing I think that was misinterpreted was that I think the only town that was given permission to have their town meeting virtually or remotely or whatever, however we call it, was Brattleboro. And the reason for that is because they know who their 150 people are that are attending their town meeting because they're representatives. But there were towns out there that held these crazy town meetings that were both in person and virtual, and they were pretty chaotic, I think. So I don't know, there's nothing to do about that, but I think some towns just went ahead and did it anyway. So, yes, Senator Rahm Hinsdale.
I mean, I think just while we have Tucker, I think this is a technical question. I'm trying to better understand, obviously towns are reaching out to us and saying they'd like to do other municipal meetings with remote options. And just while we're on the subject, so I can go back and tell them, what I understand. Was there a time bound limit on remote meetings? Did they only have special emergency order permission? When did that expire? I do think, I get that this has to move quickly. I think that is valuable to move quickly as well. I mean, we have our highest case rate today and Omicron is extremely contagious. So I see it as something that we should be discussing with some urgency as well in order to better understand it.
I'm going to respond to that. We are going to do that, and we will have a bill on open, and Tucker will work with us to get that bill that will allow them to do it remotely without having to have a physical presence. But we can pass that next week.
Okay.
This one has to go because towns have to know what they can do before they set their agendas, and their agendas, I believe, their articles have to be all done by somewhere around January 20th.
Okay.
So
you may have sent that in an email. I didn't want to make it seem like you were hiding something. I just wanted to make sure I understood that was like next week's urgency, but it's still urgent.
I think that is also very urgent. I've heard from a lot of towns and different regional planning people and everybody about that. So, but I made the decision not to put it on here because I think that's a little more complicated and we need to make sure we're doing that right. And this one was so simple. So. Anybody else want to weigh in? Gwen, Secretary Condos, Chris? Yes, Secretary Condos. You are muted.
Sorry, I thought I clicked it. Yeah, this bill was designed to be simple. and to move quickly, because essentially we need to have this thing signed into law by not this weekend, but the following weekend. So the goal is that the House and the Senate can get together on this quickly, get it to the governor's desk, and he can sign it into law as quickly as possible. Because as Senator White said, the first deadline, I think, for town meeting comes on around January 20th. The second deadline is January 24th. So we really need to get things in place as quickly as possible. I know we've had, Chris and myself and Will have had extensive conversations with VLCT, with Gwen, and with Karen about this issue. And we've all agreed that it needs to be kept concise, simple, and move quickly.
Thank you. Gwen, would you like to?
Hello, everybody. Good to see everyone's faces. Just to reiterate what the Secretary of State said, we are in agreement that this needs to go first because of the timeline. I don't think even when this bill was anticipated to be drafted up, we're close to the numbers of cases that we have now. So this issue of temporary meeting is becoming a real pressing concern. So hopefully that will be taken up very soon thereafter this moves forward. But the reason Karen Horn is not here right now is because she's actually on a webinar with Will Sennings from the Secretary of State's office to talk about the 22 town meeting. And they're actually talking about this bill right now to let everybody know sort of like what's going on and what to anticipate. So she apologizes for not being here, but she'll be here later. But thank you for taking up this bill early on.
So if they're in the middle of a webinar right now talking about this, do I have any interest? Does anybody have any interest in moving this today?
Yeah.
Senator Collimore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only thing that's preventing me from saying yes is something Tucker said about one of the provisions having to be corrected.
Okay.
If not, I would vote it out today.
So Tucker, the question is, how soon can you make that correction?
15 to 20 minutes.
Okay.
I was gonna say, I bet you could do it this
Okay.
Saturday.
So what we're going to do right now, I'm going to suggest is that we move to the Secretary of State's office to hear their priorities for the year. And then whenever Tucker is done, he comes back to us, and Senator Collimore is going to be so excited to move this.
Hey,
Works for me.
Okay. Because I think that the sooner we can get this done, the better it is. And we don't have any delays, but we don't know what's going to happen on the other side. And they're set to take it up as soon as we get it, but we just to make sure that we're allowing the time. So, okay. So bye, Tucker. We'll see you in a little while. And so with that, can we switch to the Secretary of State's office to hear what their priorities for the coming year are for us?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly.
Okay.
Whoops. So first, I want to thank you and welcome you all back. It's great to see you. I wish we could see each other in person, but we all recognize where we are. And I think back to March of 2020, when the governor put us into a shutdown and whatever. I think we all probably thought we were only going to be 4 to 6 weeks and we'd be back, doing our business in person. But here we are 2 years later, and we're still having the same discussions. It's been tough on us. It's been tough on everybody. It's been tough on the people who contact us. But thanks to the hard work of our team and all of our online systems that we've put in place over the last 10 years, we continue to provide the services and the responsiveness that Vermonters have come to expect. We were fortunate because of all the planning and processing that we had done before, that we were able to make the move to remote access very quickly. And in most cases, Vermonters have 24/7 access to the things that they need from the Secretary of State's office. For instance, they can register their new business or file their annual report 24/7. They can go to OPR and submit their license application. They can go to elections and file reports, campaign finance reports, lobbyist disclosure reports. It's all done online. So we've done a really good job about getting to that point. We know that this is a busy committee for this year, and you have many COVID-related issues, including, of course, redistricting, pensions, just to name a few, and we appreciate the time. Senator White, is this committee going to handle the Senate redistricting, or are you going to have the redistricting committee separate?
Separate redistricting committee.
Okay. So the first thing on our agenda and our highest priority right now, obviously, is the town meeting legislation, which we've just heard and hopefully will be moving very quickly. We know that redistricting and it needs to be signed into law by April 1st, because the first deadline beginning of nominating petition deadline starts on April 24th. So it's not so bad for a statewide as far as submitting a nominating petition, but for a House or a Senate member, you need to know what your district is in order to start collecting those signatures as you go. So we think that if you can get it by April 1st, since you only need 50 or 100, depending on whether it's House or Senate, that should give you ample time. We do know that the Legislative Apportionment Board, and I guess you'll be hearing from them as well if you haven't already, but they are by a 4-3 majority, so it was definitely a split majority, have proposed single member districts. I will say, from my perspective, it's noble in concept, but very difficult to do in application. If you go to the Vermont Constitution and the state statutes, both actually contemplate multi-member districts. Nominating petitions, as I said, are due between April 25th and May 26th. Those dates are not arbitrary. They can't just be, the only date that could possibly be moved would be the April 25th. May 26th is really pretty much set. That's the final deadline that we need. But on the same hand, all of these deadlines for elections this coming year start with November election day. And we have to back up from there. We have to back up 45 days for when ballots have to be mailed out to overseas and military, and Vermonters get 45 days early voting. Then you have to back up to when the primary is, and all these dates start to back up, and there is not a lot of room to pick up if for instance, you guys went several weeks past April 1st on settling on district maps. So I will just say simply, there's no room for delay. We do know, and I'm just going to make you aware, but there is some election threat language, but also maybe it should be including all elected officials and state workers and local boards and officials. This is to strengthen some of our laws. That's going to be in the Judiciary Committee. I think Senator Sears has it. And part of this is the result of, as many of you have heard, our office received death threats. I guess you can't put it any other way. Last year in November and December, and then we received more again in this past October. There was a national story about it. It's also, to be blunt, several of my colleagues are still under 24/7 security details because they've been threatened considerably throughout the year. Part of the problem has been that the state law is not as strong as it should be compared to the federal law. The federal law, and this is coming from the state's attorney and from public safety, the federal law has guardrails built around it that have been through the Supreme Court. So we know what's allowed, but the Vermont law is much weaker. And I know Senator Sears is interested, as several of your members in the House and Senate were also threatened. I'm not going to get into ranked choice voting because I think Senator White has already spoken about that it's really not an issue until 24. So there's plenty of time to do something for that. We are considering, although I don't think it's necessary right away, but something that should be on the back burner somewhere is emergency powers for the Secretary of State in case of an emergency when you're out of session. And specifically, you know, if Hurricane Irene had hit at the same time as an election day, we wouldn't have had much chance to do anything with regards to elections. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done, but that's at this point, I can't see dealing with it right now. We also want to talk about, and this is again something that could be dealt with next year probably, but piggybacking on state primary and general election. Municipalities often will put a bond vote or something on the same day as our state primary and general election. But then the townspeople get upset because they get our ballots from us for the statewide primary and for the general election 45 days ahead of time, and they don't receive the ballots for the local election until 20 days before the election. And it's confusing to people as to what they're filling out and sending back. So, and town meeting, I think, is also, now that many towns are starting to go to vote by mail, city of Burlington, city of Montpelier, and other towns, I think that what is now considered to be the normal of 20 days before the election is just not enough time to be mailing a ballot out, having someone fill it out and getting it back. So we would suggest that you at least go to a 30-day for mailing ballots out instead of 20. But that's something that can be dealt with next year when we do a overall elections bill. And finally, on the elections front, I just want to make sure that the committee is aware the HAVA dollars are starting to shrink. And if the federal government doesn't step in at some point in the near future to start providing more money to states for elections, we will be out of money. We're about to spend close to $3 million for new tabulators for the state. The tabulators we have been around for over 20 years in some cases. They've reached their life usefulness, and we really have to. We're going to go to new machines that actually work better. And instead of being optical scanners, they're going to be digital scanners, which means they're more accurate and have less chance of rejecting ballots that you see today. In the area of open meeting law, we'll have this discussion next week or whenever Senator White brings it up. I think the underlying points to remember is the open meeting law provides for the public's right to know, the public's right to attend, and the public's right to participate. So we think it's okay to temporarily lift the physical meeting requirements, but we're not sure that it makes sense on a permanent basis at this point. So if the committee wants to talk about temporarily lifting those requirements, we're fine. We can have that discussion. I think some of the factors that you need to look at are what's the end date? If there's no state of emergency, how do you end it? Would we pick an arbitrary date, April 1st or May 1st or whatever? Or do we tie it to COVID levels if there's no state of emergency ever called? For instance, right now, we're not in a state of emergency. At least according to the governor, we're not in a state of emergency. So there's no backing that we have to defend ourselves for going forward. I think anything that you do as far as lifting the temporary location, physical meeting requirements should include requiring remote options, including a telephone. So I think there has to be a way for people to access the meetings because, again, going back to the public has a right to know, to attend, and to participate. And not everybody has a computer, and not everybody's computer works well. And I think Exhibit A for me is I was cut off twice today while I was sitting here. As far as OPR goes, we got great news there. We have no OPR bill this year. So Senator White, there is no OPR bill that we're going to have to be pushing forward. There is a notary digital land record bill that is important to both OPR and to Visara. I'm sorry, to Visara. And these are updates to notary to the notary laws. Basically, it's the revised uniform law called Rolona. There's also Chris, you know how to pronounce that. I should probably let Chris handle this piece of it. But the Uniform Real Property Electronic Recording Act, this is about allowing town clerks to accept electronic records for recording and performing electronic recording of land records overall. I won't get into much more detail because that's something we can do later. We think that this should be a separate bill, perhaps a committee bill, and we'll go from there. Home improvement contractors, nothing really to say this year as far because it passed the House, it passed the Senate with changes, and then time ran out. It's over. I think it's sitting in the House now, waiting for their action to move it to the governor's desk. We did issue 3-4 reports this year. OPR issued a report on telehealth. This bill is going to be dealt with, I believe, in some of the other committees, healthcare committees, but essentially it's about COVID licensure waivers of Act 60, which expire on March 31st. That needs to be updated as quickly as possible. Psychologist prescribing information report was filed. There's the joint report from OPR and the Agency of Education about discipline. And the only comment I'll make on that at this point in time is that right now, I believe that transparency and accountability has been misplaced. And because this was a joint report, we couldn't really bring that out, but we can talk about that later. And then there was a real estate sunset review, which will be presented to the committee as well. That's pretty much it for us. We'll obviously be here to respond to the needs of the committee. As you all know, this committee is important to me as I was once chair of this committee and Senator White was my vice chair. So this is a great committee. I love this committee, and we stand before you to help as much as we can. Chris, did you want to add anything?
I think you covered it, Jim. Thank you. I'll just point out a couple of additions on that issue of local ballots getting out earlier. I understand there is a National Guard caucus in the legislature. Representative Sibilia is heavily involved in that. They're going to be taking this issue up a week from today. So they may have some recommendations for you if they think that there ought to be any changes around getting those ballots to our overseas and military voters. The digital land records issue, also just for your information, House Commerce has put forth a bill. I don't know if it has a number yet, but it's sponsored by Representative Marcotte and Representative Kimball, and contains what the title insurance folks and bankers and real estate bar are proposing, and we are proposing something different than what they are proposing. We all have the same goal in mind of improving our land records and standardizing how our town clerks handle those land records, provide access, provide electronic real estate transactions, but we differ on how we would get there. So there are some alternate approaches being proposed to modernizing our land records. And then the last thing I just wanted to say, I'm glad to hear that the committee is really interested in the ethics standards for state employees, and look forward to hearing your work on that bill.
Jeanette, you're muted.
I see that. Senator, did you have a question?
I did. Just going back, Mr. Secretary, to your report, probably a good thing we don't have OPR bills this year. One of the things I was interested in following up on was a change with, I believe, a change within OPR to make sure that we have good data about the types of business owners we have in the state, women and minority owned businesses, and other ways to do a better job, tracking our data. Is that complete? Is that further along? Do you have an update on that?
So I'm going to pass this off to Chris in a second, but I do want to say, are you talking about corporate registrations, not professional regulation?
For some reason, I thought this was like we were, you know what? I'm mixing them up, but we were also talking within OPR about understanding the demographics of people who sought licenses. I'm thinking of them as smaller businesses, like sole proprietorships. So I am merging the two in my mind, probably accurately.
Senator, I think it's both. So there are some small businesses licensed by OPR, and of course, any small business has to register with the Secretary of State's Office Corporations Division. We have our Biz Portal project that stalled out for a number of reasons over the last year, COVID being one of them, some contracting issues, some document management issues. We do have a survey in place and ready to go when it finally does launch that will ask those demographic questions on women-owned, BIPOC-owned, veteran-owned. And so we can gather a lot more information and connect people who register these businesses with resources that might be available to them. And of course, providing a lot of more information to the legislature to drive your policy decisions in the economic development, workforce, and other things in your work in the legislature. So it's definitely a work in progress. We hope to have it just as soon as possible, but we don't have a definite go live date on that yet.
Okay, thanks.
Senator Clarkson?
Thank you, Chris, because, there's so much on our plate. We need to remember in economic development to get you to come in to do an update on the portal, because that's been a baby we're very proud of and want very much to see launched. And that data is very important for us to be collecting. So one question I want to make sure we continue, and I just had assumed it was going to be continued, is the reciprocity licensure work, because as we look at our workforce development crisis here in Vermont, one of the low-hanging fruit pieces that we've been addressing with OPR and Lauren and in different professions has been the extension of reciprocity with licensure. I had assumed that would be part of the OPR bill, and that was clearly maybe a mistake on my part. But do you have an update? Or I guess we could ask Lauren, Madam Chair, we could ask Lauren to come in and update us on where we are with that and where some of those opportunities lie.
We definitely should have Lauren in to talk about that.
Yeah.
I can tell you off the top of my head, you have passed legislation that authorizes us to do expedited licensure for people who have 3 years of experience or more in other states. Lets them come in.
Right. In every profession. Right.
Yep. And we've licensed, I think it's around 1,200 people now this year. That started on January 1st, around 1,200 people this year alone on that expedited processing, which is cutting edge for very few states do that.
No, we're very proud of that. I realize, but I thought that there were some additional compacts and, other expedited licensure things we were working on. And anyway, we'll look forward
We'll have Lauren come in.
Yeah.
and talk to us. And Chris, I assume you meant since January of 2021, you've done 1,200, not since January of 2022,
Actually,
because
it was
that would
May.
be pretty,
If they're trying to keep up with our COVID cases.
oh, I see. So are there any other questions for the Secretary of State's office? If not, what I'm going to suggest is we take a 5-minute break, because I know some of us need a 5-minute break.
Good
Then we
idea.
come back at 3:17. My computer says 3:12. 3:17. We'll hear from both Tucker and VLCT. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay.